Hey, morning, Cliff.
Yeah, something like that.
How you doing, man?
I oh, just not much energy today.
Worn out?
Yeah, I don't want to say burnout, but just like exhausted. And then
Yeah.
I have an interview after this, so
Oh, nice.
um, I'll try to participate. But otherwise, how you doing?
Oh, doing all right. Yeah, doing all right. Kind of worn out too, but coming up on the end of the week, I got tomorrow off, which is real nice. So
Did you have Monday off?
no, just tomorrow. Yeah.
3 day
What's,
weekend.
what was that?
3 day weekend.
3 day weekend. Yeah. I'm trying to. This is getting really close to being done with this course I'm teaching, so I'm trying to just push hard and finish it up this weekend, or finish what I can to kind of be done. Which would be really, really nice.
Yeah. I was actually what's I don't know a good word for it, but when you said you're going to leave that and come over here more often, I was like, whoa, okay, that's dedication.
Well, teaching has been a good experience over at the school for sure, but no, it's a lot of time, and it's less teaching and more administration. And there's some admin that comes with this too, but the students and kind of what we're up to is a lot more fun. So,
You gonna go grab coffee before it starts?
yeah.
All right, I'll leave you alone. And before anybody gets here, anything or any heads up on that link for Larry's class for tomorrow? Or are we at pass for right now?
Oh, sorry, I was on mute. Yeah, if you want
But I thought maybe you're busy or you're.
just talking to myself. Yeah, if you want to send me over a copy for a post, then I can look it over. And Vincent and I are hopping on a call this afternoon to catch up a little bit. Let's see. All right, I got polls ready to go. I'm gonna go top off on coffee, and I'll be right back.
Morning, Brent. Morning, Josh.
Morning.
Morning.
Well, good morning, Brent and Josh. How are you fellas this morning? Josh, I think I've seen you on a call maybe once before, but good to have you back.
Hey, thanks. Yeah, I've been here a couple times now.
Excellent.
Hey, Paul. Morning.
Hey, good morning, guys. Morning.
Brent, if you don't mind my asking, where are you joining us from in the world?
From Dallas, Texas.
From Dallas. Okay, very nice, very nice. Well, great to have you here. How did you find out about our group?
I just started looking into finally getting serious about this and found you.
Well, excellent. Yeah, grateful to have you here. Grateful to have you here. Are you working in information security right now, or what prompted you to move towards getting your CISSP?
I've wanted to get it for a few years and just life getting in the way, and I have time now, so I just need to do it.
Yeah, It's hard to stay disciplined on something like that. It's good to have a group or a community to kind of help keep you accountable a little bit, keep you motivated.
Yes.
Yeah. Sandra, good morning. Great to see you here.
Hi, everyone. Thank you.
Morning, Roshan. And Josh, I sent that on your LinkedIn.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I'll check that in a bit. Excellent. Well, we'll give people a couple more minutes as we're joining. We have a poll launched as an icebreaker in the so the poll section is in the activities section of Google Meet. It's a handful of shapes bunched together. So there's an icebreaker poll launched. We'll use that for our practice questions that we're going through today. I've had just about all of you with me on the group before, except Brent. So Brent, thanks for being our new joiner. We'll usually have a couple more people joining up here shortly. So as we're kind of kicking things off, my name is Josh. So I am CISSP certified. I have my master's degree in information security. And I work currently as a teacher as well. I have a day job in cybersecurity too. So grateful to be here with you. I use the term instructor here very loosely, much more of a facilitator, especially since today we're going to be focusing on Domain 6, security assessment and testing. A lot of this dives into coding and best practices with that, and that's definitely a weak domain, admittedly, of mine. I just don't come from a software background. So grateful we have other people on the call here that can kind of help supplement where I have some weak areas. So if you do have questions, please ask, though. Even if I don't know the answer, someone else on the call may, or I have a list of questions right next to me that we can jot down and address later. So excellent. So Ramanan, great to see you. Deepu, lovely to see you as well. Great to have you guys back here. Feels like it's been a while. I haven't been here for a couple of Thursday sessions. So, all right. Well, I am curious to hear from a couple of you about how things have been going with studying. If anyone has successes or challenges, if you're finding some great study resources, curious to hear from you about how things have been going, prepping for the tests. Rebecca, good morning. Great to have you here. Paul, how have things been since passing? No one's got successes or challenges. Studying is going
sorry.
pretty smoothly.
Making a cup of coffee there.
Oh, you're all good, buddy.
It's going pretty good, man. Just going through the motions of for the membership and updating my resume and starting to increase my job search. So yeah, going pretty good.
Nice. Good to hear. Good to hear, man. Okay, yeah, Josh is saying he studies the all-in-one CISSP book. Good deal.
Hey, I just want to add, Josh, not to interrupt there. I just want to let everyone know on the call that this group, Josh has been doing a great job with this group. It's helped me to pass the CISSP. I took it, 3 times, passed on the 3rd try. My background is in network engineering. And he's very professional, and the way he approaches it is from different angles, not just like pounding questions, but giving the psychology behind it and giving you different ways to look at a question, and that's helped me immensely. So if you guys are questioning whether this is the group or not, I can attest to that it will definitely help you. Okay. And if you put in the work, it'll definitely help you. So thanks again, guys.
That's tremendous and kind of you, Paul. Thank you. Yeah, I'm grateful to hear that, and grateful that that's since been some other people's experience too. It's really a special community, really special community. Yeah. And Rebecca just mentioned it's an answer to prayer. It's the same way for me. People like Cliff and Paul and all of you on this call. It's really amazing community. So very, very blessed. Yeah, it's a good way to put that. Yeah. Annette, I see you on the call here. Wonderful to see you. It feels like it's been a couple of weeks. Great to have you here.
I'm sorry I missed and I was so busy at work last week because we had some people out.
Yeah.
There's only like about 5 of us in my group. So if we have people, yeah. So and they broke something, so we were pretty busy. So I wasn't able to make it on Thursday, and Tuesday I had to take my son to a Cub Scout meeting. So
nice. Wow,
Yeah.
good, good.
But I'm glad to be here. Like Paul said, this is a group to be. Like I enjoy your class and I enjoy everybody's input. You guys are amazing. So yeah, thank you for
Group for sure. Yeah, thanks, Annette. And Josh, I see a couple of you are at work or at home with people sleeping. No problem if you're communicating through chat. If you do communicate with questions or something in the chat and I miss you, please let me know or raise your hand or something like that. Sometimes I'm not keeping up with the chat as we go along. So, but totally understood there. Excellent. Yeah, excellent. All right. So thank you for sharing a little bit. I really appreciate that. It's just, again, this is just such a great group. I feel really blessed to be with you guys. So as mentioned, today we're going to be focusing on Domain 6, security assessment and testing. So we have some practice questions that we'll go through, a couple of concepts that we'll unpack a little bit deeper in here. Again, just admittedly, this is a weaker domain of mine. I study for these sessions the same way you're studying for the exam. So I get to practice teaching and you guys will get practice speaking up on the spot when you guys know something I don't. So before we dive into our first practice question, which let me just double check. Yes. Okay. Before we go to our first practice question, the next slide, as you guys got a quick view of, we'll have the question and 4 possible answers. So I'll set a timer on my phone for about 50 seconds, which you'll want to have as a good idea for your pace during the actual exam. It ends up being a little bit more than that, but I'd like to have you guys speed up a little bit. That way you can buy yourself some time on some more challenging questions in the exam. You'll read through the slide and the questions just to yourself as that timer is going. When we're finished up, you'll put your answers into the poll, which again is in the activities section of Google Meet. There's some shapes clumped together in the bottom right of your screen. If you click into there, you'll see polls, and I think I still have an icebreaker poll launched. Yeah, nice. All in there, we get some people that just like being here in IT and security. I think that's the best reason possible. So, all right. We will get ready for the poll. Does anyone have any questions before we officially kick things off here? Okay. Well, we'll pause again after the first question. So go ahead and get your pencils ready, so to speak. And go ahead. First question's launched. Okay, you got a few more seconds left to put your answers in the poll. Nice job. Getting some good answers. Okay, nice. In the poll and show you guys that we have a good consensus here on Fuzzer. Nice job. So let's walk through here first. Let's play the keyword game. Who's got a couple of keywords in the question that really stand out as important in order to guide us towards the correct answer here? What are some of our keywords? Automated tool. Yeah, absolutely, Josh. We're looking for an automated tool. You can see we're using a web application form. We're wanting to look at format string vulnerabilities here. So a black box testing we'll talk about later, but essentially black box is a type of test, but it's not anything specific to web forms necessarily. We might use black box in some aspect here, but we'll have some other practice questions this morning that will unpack that much better. A brute force tool. Now, this kind of makes sense if you understand what the question is asking, but a brute force tool here, I think, is probably trying to lead you in the direction of maybe a brute force password cracker or something similar to that. We aren't going to be able to brute force test for vulnerabilities except with a fuzzer. A fuzzer. Who is able to take themselves off mute and tell me a little bit about what a fuzzer is or what it does? Why do we have a fuzzer? Why did someone come up with that? I know someone has an idea on this. I always thought this was a weird name, a fuzzer. Josh is just saying he ruled out the other answers. That's totally legitimate, man. Good practice. So a fuzzer, essentially what we're doing is we're stress testing an application by throwing a lot of random information, trying strange inputs, and seeing how the system responds. We're trying almost to break it. And we're breaking it in such a way that we can identify its vulnerabilities and make it more resilient, an application that's more resilient to misuse potentially. So think of this, like the example I like to use is you've seen car commercials where they're trying to show you how rugged and tough a truck is. So they drive at full speed through a desert, and then they'll show you they're freezing it in some special room. Then they have it on the machine that just rumbles the tires to check the suspension. It's kind of what a fuzzer is doing. It's taking your code and it's driving it through the desert at full speed, and then it's freezing your code and then put it on the rumbling machine. It's seeing how it's going to stand up under weird, unexpected conditions. So, and yeah, Deepu said it sends random data to the application. Absolutely. So we're looking at format string vulnerabilities. So it'll throw strings that's into this web form in all sorts of different formats to see what happens. Does it respond correctly? Does it throw the correct error messages? Maybe it's giving information it shouldn't when there's some sort of an application crash. We hear about things like buffer overflows or race conditions. Those could potentially be triggered when we're using a fuzzer. So it's a great way to see what's going to break this potentially. How is our application going to respond? Resilience is a good word to have for this. A static analysis tool. We'll talk about static versus dynamic analysis here a little bit more throughout the morning. But the main thing I want to call out here is we need to test a form. We need to actually submit data. There needs to be some type of an execution that's taking place. The static analysis tool just looks at the raw code. It's not that we won't find vulnerabilities doing it that way, but we won't find this type of vulnerability, format string vulnerabilities related to like an actual web application form. So we'll get ready for question 2 here, unless anyone has some questions on this. Yeah, Roshan, love to hear from you.
Hi, Josh. Just wanted to ask how misuse case testing is different from fuzzer then? I'm just confused.
That's a great question. That's a great question. And someone else jump in if they have an alternate answer that's a little bit stronger. The key word that I have is the automated tool. A fuzzer is ready to go to plug in random information. It kind of has some configurations like that versus misuse testing. I'll be a little bit more specific. But Saravana, do you have something to add to that for us?
Yeah, I mean, whatever I know, like, and I can throw out this on this one. Fuzzer is a negative testing tool, not a misuse testing tool. Right? A misuse would be something that you wanted to extract information out of some testing. So that's what a misuse testing would be. That's all I know.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah.
So let me just add. Yeah, I've been seeing these words: misuse case testing, negative testing. I really don't know what's the difference between the two. I just look at them as being the same. You're trying to send some unexpected data to the application to see the way the application reacts, and a fuzzer is going to actually help you achieve that. Like if you want to do misuse case testing or negative testing, a fuzzer is the tool that will help you do that.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you guys. I appreciate you guys jumping in and helping us out with that. Yeah. So a fuzzer can help us to identify misuse cases of, okay, if we could misuse data in this way, and this is maybe what an attacker could discover. Misuse case testing might happen without a fuzzer as well, a little bit more manually, but I think there's an interrelation between those two terms. Sandra, did you have a question or something to help us understand this more?
I think you kind of like answered it in that last sentence, because my question was, well, how do you actually find the vulnerability if it's just going to send all this data and see how it responds to it? How does it know that this format of a string is going to cause some vulnerability or is going to cause some sort of issue? So that's the part I was just trying to work out in my head.
Absolutely. That's a great question. And admittedly, I've never used a fuzzer in production. So I'm teaching more just, this is all book knowledge for me. Other people have better answers for this, I'm sure. But yeah, we get to observe what happens when you hear about information disclosure as one thing. You can throw information and you don't know what might come back if there's an error or a problem. You also hear about concepts like fail open or fail close. So if you're using random data and that random data maybe crashes an application or leads to buffer overflow, then we can see, okay, does it actually truly fail closed if that's what we want, or does it fail open? There's things like that that you can discover as well. Deepu, did you have something to add to that for us?
Yes, so basically you will use a fuzzer along with a debugger or some sort of a reverse engineering tool. So when an application crashes, you can look at the memory dump of the application. You can, with the help of reverse engineering tools, you'll figure out, where your random data is inside of the running memory of the application and what you need to modify to perhaps exploit the application. So that is how you would use information after fuzzing it with random data. You need to be working with the debugging tools.
Really great call out, Deepu. Thank you for that. That really helps kind of complete this, because we have a fuzzer, but we need to use it alongside some sort of a debugging tool or reverse engineering tool to actually, like you were calling out, Sandra, well, we broke it. How do we fix it? How do we know what we even did? So,
is anybody here familiar with DAST, Dynamic Application Security Testing, that they could explain on that to show the difference between that and a fuzzer?
So my understanding of the difference between a fuzzer, and then again, just unpack what Cliff did mention. He mentioned SAST and DAST. SAST is kind of what this is referring to, a static static application security testing, and DAST is the dynamic application security testing. So we talked about for this, the code is static. It's not being executed. We're looking at the raw code to identify vulnerabilities. Dynamic is when the code is actually running, we're executing. And a fuzzer is going to be run while the code is executing. So there is a relationship there between the two. But the difference is the fuzzer is going to be throwing a lot of random data, again, kind of stress testing, versus a dynamic application is just looking for code. Looking for vulnerabilities, making sure it's running correctly. We'll talk about some of the test conditions that dynamic application testing runs as well that are a little bit different than a fuzzer. And fuzzer is more random information to stress test an application, whereas dynamic is more, okay, let's test it under the real world conditions, make sure it's running as we expect it to and everything works appropriately.
Actually feeding it malicious data, cross-site scripting, SQL injections is what DAST does.
Yeah, perfect, exactly. Yeah. Sandra, do you have something else for us there?
I was just going to say, so is it more, when you say the vulnerabilities, you're trying to work out how weak it is in that respect to its resilience or reliability of that code? Is that what you mean by?
Yeah, I would say that's a good way to put it, Sandra. Yeah. Nicely done.
Hey, John, quick question on that as well. I just thought of something. It's kind of related to this. What's the difference between beta testing and there's also another testing where, because I know like with our automation team, I would help them, design the automation on what the tools should do, right? So when they would write the code, they would kind of trickle release it out. They'll kind of trickle release it out to the production team, but like maybe a small section. So what's the difference between that and beta testing?
Can I add something I just saw this week? There's, you might be talking about quality assurance, which I just learned is different than quality control. But if you look at a circle, quality management encircles both of them. Quality assurance is beta testing, pretty much similar. And then quality control is the product actually going out. But for me, quality assurance and beta testing are, I would say, interchangeable.
They very well can be. They very well can be. So in a lot of environments like this, like I worked in an R&D environment. I was on the infrastructure side, but I got to work with developers, and they had a development environment. That's for them. That's for them to go crazy, start building things out, test things. It's okay to break things. They rebuild these environments all the time. They have a testing environment where it's a little bit more formalized. This is, we use the word beta test, and I don't know if there's a formal definition you're looking for, but we could be internally beta testing it, or we're trying to make sure, does this perform the way we expect it to? Are we comfortable testing this as a release? So we have change management, and then we have release management as well. So if we have some feature that we want to release or a bug we want to resolve, then we may have a new release of our code that resolves that. And we may or may not beta test it. Some companies will do what's called A/B testing, where they'll have two versions of their code published to two different client sets so that they can get a sense of what issues might be going on with one versus the other. So they can, in a sense, beta test their code in production. But they've already done an internal test of that code themselves. So when it's internal, they're going through the development and testing environments. They're doing things like running SAST and DAST scans, or taking a fuzzer to their application before they actually bring it out into public, where there still might be issues, but we've already addressed the 90% most serious ones. Does that kind of make sense, Paul? That's more general.
Yeah. That helps. Thanks for the input, Doug.
Yeah, different levels of testing in different environments. But by the time it's in true production, we need to have a degree of confidence that we can have assurance over our code or our software.
All right.
Okay, nice job, everyone. Really, really great questions. Thank you for those of you who are jumping in to help out with explaining things. Really just makes all the difference. Okay, so get ready for question 2. And there we go, launched. Nice job. Got some votes coming in. Got a few more seconds to get your answer in. Okay. Nice. Well done. Majority again has it with open VAS. Okay. Let's walk through our keywords. What are a couple of the most important keywords in this question? Because they do try and trick you in here a little bit. Open source, Josh nailed it. Absolutely. We need an open source tool. We're scanning for vulnerabilities. And we want to test the machine remotely, which is kind of helpful information, not necessarily absolutely necessary though. So let's walk through here. Nmap. What is Nmap? Boy, this is one of the greatest tools of our trade, I think. One of the first things a lot of security or network engineer professionals will start messing around with. What's Nmap? A scanning tool. Yeah, can we find vulnerabilities with Nmap? Is that something that tool is able to do? It can help us to validate vulnerabilities, and this is absolutely a tool that's used in discovery and reconnaissance. We may or may not find vulnerabilities, but it's not a vulnerability scanning tool. It won't help us there, but it's a great network scanning tool. Some of you mentioned. We'll be talking about network and port scanning here this morning as well. OpenVAS we'll come back to. MBSA is Microsoft Baseline Security Analyzer. This is proprietary. It's not open source. This is Microsoft specific. Does similar types of things as scanning a Windows workstation to see if the configuration is up to a certain standard there. How about Nessus? Why is Nessus not the answer? Because Nessus is a vulnerability scanning tool.
I mean, it's not open source anymore.
Not open source anymore. Absolutely. In the early 2000s, Nessus went private or went commercial. So Nessus, you also hear the name Tenable as well. It's kind of a pairing of that. Common in government work, not absolutely in government work all the time, but yeah, not open source. So OpenVAS is the correct answer, our open source vulnerability scanning tool. These are fun to play around with, by the way. If you aren't into labs, you are missing out on the whole, like the best part of our career field, I think, is the labs. So, all right, let's get ready for question 3 here. Unless anyone has any questions on this topic here.
Josh, just what you said on the labs. What do you mean by that? Like, how do you get access to it? Where is it?
Great question. So when I say labs, there are lots of places out there where you can find like pre-established or set up labs, and those are great. But more what I'm referring to is just the willingness and ability to play around with some of these things. Nmap is a great example of running some different types of scans to see what comes back. With the vulnerability scanner, there's a tool called Wazza or Wazoo, depending on how you pronounce it. And it's an open source EDR system, endpoint detection response. It can do vulnerability scannings. It's also a SIEM, system event and information and event monitoring. Deepu mentioned Try Hack Me because they have a lot of great labs. That's a great example, Deepu. If anyone has suggestions like that of lab type environments like that, please put them in the chat. But you get to play around with what we learn about. Everything is so abstract that when you can run a vulnerability scan on your system, you can look at the vulnerabilities, get a sense of what they are, maybe even go validate them. Boy, it just makes learning so interesting. You can create, my favorite thing is to create a sandbox of some sort. There's an application, I'm going to put this in the chat because I just think this is the coolest. Forgive me for getting distracted. I'm indulging this distraction because it's so good, Sandra. Okay.
Right.
Putting a link in the chat to something called Chasm, K-A-S-M. What this is it's a container streaming platform. We're not talking, so much of that is out of scope of the conversation today, but essentially all it means to you is that you can launch an environment where you can create your own labs. You can have safe environments running Kali Linux that you can open up anytime, completely safe and fresh to use. You can do it right in your browser, even if you're on a Windows workstation. Really, really powerful tool. And there's so much you can do with it. So we learn about these concepts, and the CISSP doesn't have you apply them on the exam, but man, it reinforces learning. Plus, it's just interesting. So if you are looking for labs to do, one of the places I get my labs is from a YouTube channel called Network Chuck. I'll put that in the chat as well, from YouTube. He has some amazing labs that you can go through. Yeah, we're getting distracted there, but that's kind of what I mean by that, Sandra. If you have some more questions or are looking for some recommendations, reach out to me over the school platform. So I wish we had time to do labs every day in the study group.
Okay, great. Thanks. Maybe you can put that as one of the tutorials. Play around in that.
I'm putting it on my continuing questions list. It doesn't necessarily belong there given the scope, but it's going on. Okay. We're doing a lab session. Okay. Yeah, that'd be a good change of pace one of these days. All right. Well, let's get ready for question 3 here. Oh, Rebecca, you had your hand raised. Yeah, go ahead, please.
Oh, I posted a couple of ideas.
OWASP
I'm
membership
sorry.
you mentioned and port server.
Can you hear me?
I can, yes.
Oh, okay. So I posted a couple of ideas, but that's leaning more towards AppSec.
Yeah, and that's okay. You know, we have a lot of things to learn about, and even if they're not applicable for the CISSP, put them in your back pocket. When you find these sort of resources, bookmark them, because in a year you might need something like that, or might be in a change of situation at work. So it's a good thing to keep a library of some bookmarks. Okay, yeah, thank you for putting those in the chat, Rebecca. I appreciate that. Okay, question 3. Here we go. Go ahead. Okay, a few more seconds to get your answers into the poll. All right. Nice. Well done. Okay, we got consensus on black box penetration test. Black box penetration test. Okay, let's walk through this. I have a slide coming up here that'll unpack the black, gray, white aspect of this. Okay, Jim is going to perform a pen test for a bank. They want to make the test as real as possible. That's an important note there, as real as possible. And he's not been given any information about the bank. He just has a name and an address. So he doesn't know anything at all. And he's trying to make it as realistic as possible. We're trying to replicate what an attacker would know. The attacker could easily find the name and address of a bank that they want to go after, but any other information, they have to start gathering through reconnaissance. They don't know its public IP address. They don't know the scope. They don't know the internal IP range. They don't know the naming conventions or anything like that. All of that has to be accomplished through reconnaissance and discovery. So it's a much more realistic type of test. A black box, think of, you got your eyes closed. Everything's black. You're in a box. You got to kind of feel around to get a sense of what you can do or where you are in the room. An attacker is doing that same thing. They start out in a black box. So the gradient that they have here is zero knowledge. Technically, we don't have zero knowledge. We have a name and an address, but we're trying to get as close as possible to zero knowledge. Gray box testing, we start to add in some information. I'll come back to gray box testing. White box, we have full knowledge. This could be the example of an internal penetration test. We might even have a set of administrative credentials, potentially. So we fully know what's going on, and we're trying to test it almost from a level of an insider threat, in a way. What are the most serious vulnerabilities that we have if someone were to get deep into our systems? Gray box testing is a mix between the two. We don't have all the information. We have some of the information. This, I would say, is the most common type of testing that you'll have, even just for the concept that we need rules of engagement and we need scopes if we're doing this type of testing, especially penetration testing, because otherwise we run a risk of breaking things or potentially breaking into something that we didn't have authority or authorization to break into. So as an example of this, I have some social engineering testing that I get to do next month. And the company that I'm working with, we're doing a gray box test. So I don't have the names of their employees, but I have the names of some employees that I get to pretend that I am. So I have some insider information, but I don't know a lot of their internal systems or processes. I have to figure those out or guess or try and adapt. So that's the gray box testing. Some, but not all, we're trying to replicate more of what an attacker would do, but a little bit more safely by giving some background knowledge. So does anyone have questions on the whole concept of black, white, and gray box testing? I see Saravanan and Kazim. I would love to hear from you, Kazim. Good to have you here this morning.
Yeah, hello, everyone. Josh, so I went for black box pen test, right? But after I clicked that option, something came to my mind. I know somewhere I've read about physical pen testing, right? Like getting physical access to a building. So I'm just thinking, I just need clarification. So if I know the name of the branch and the address, is that not some kind of level of information there?
It is.
That great box.
Yeah, great points there, Kazim. So there's a concept called OSINT, Open Source Intelligence, OSINT. This is information that's freely available on the web that someone can grab. And the idea is that with a black box penetration test, you're starting with the level of information that an attacker could pretty much immediately have with any deep research. So a quick Google search would give him that information on the type of test. Same thing with the physical penetration test. Now there is the concept of security through obscurity, like hiding a site. I worked in the intelligence community for a little while, and we had a co-location, but no one was allowed to know where the colo was. Just some weird security thing. So it was a security through obscurity type of thing. So in that sense, the name and address would instantly make it a gray box test. So it depends on your environment. Again, the idea is a black box is you're trying as much as possible to mimic a hacker, as real as possible with as little information as possible, what would an attacker have? So open source intelligence kind of helps maybe address that bridge of why this is black box instead of gray. Does that make sense, Kazim?
Yeah, oh, thank you.
Excellent. Yeah, absolutely. So, Evelyn, did you have a question or call out for us?
I kind of yeah, same question. Like, because we know like that if you don't know any information, that makes sense. But in this case, like you have some information. That's what I was kind of wanted to debate. Like is it a black box or a gray box?
Yeah. Again, it depends on the scope or the type of engagement. If it's just a regular old bank and an attacker could pick that out and find its address very quickly using open source intelligence, I mean, just a Google search. If it goes deeper than that, starts getting maybe employers, like executive names, starts going deeper, tries to find their license plate number so they know if they parked at the building that morning. Now we're starting to go into something deeper beyond just not knowing anything. So it is a little bit of a gray area. You can justify gray box, especially if they're not supposed to have this information, if it's not public knowledge. But public knowledge, public domain is kind of where we start to draw that line. Yeah, Rebecca, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, in this instance, I think it's a ploy to throw people off. If he's doing a pen test, I believe it's on their application, not necessarily. So it's a logical endeavor rather than a physical endeavor. It doesn't matter what the name of the company is. Their various branches would still use the same application. So that remains a black box. Knowing the name and address of the company, I don't believe would matter for the work that's
a great. This physical penetration testing may or may not be in scope, so then the address might not be relevant. Yeah, good call out, Rebecca. Yeah, nice. Okay. Yep, absolutely. There's some gray area in gray box testing, absolutely, which is, again, why most tests take place in this. If I'm doing a test, I want more than the name and address of a place. That's too far in the black box testing where I'm worried, okay, I attacked the wrong thing that was supposed to be out of scope because I didn't know. So gray box testing is the most common type that you will see. Attackers are doing true black box testing unless they've gotten some information somehow. Okay, let's get ready for our next question. Well done. Thank you guys for keeping up your great questions. I really appreciate that. All right. Question 4, go ahead. Okay, you got a few more seconds left. Get your answers in. Y'all are doing really, really well. Nice job. Okay. Last chance. Nice, nice. All right, boy, you guys are doing well this morning. Consensus rules again, interface testing. Boy, if you as a group took the CISSP exam, you'd pass with ease for sure. So we're looking type of testing. It's going to ensure separately developed software modules, and we're looking to make sure that they exchange data properly. So let's start with fuzzing. Now we know that the CISSP will a lot of times try and trick us. They'll put answers that are correct, but only partially correct. Or then they're looking for the most correct or the most comprehensive or an answer that is an umbrella that contains the other answers potentially. So let's start with fuzzing. Could fuzzing potentially help us to accomplish this goal in some way? Is fuzzing potentially applicable here? I'm kind of inclined to think that it could be. We want to stress test our applications. We want to stress test even data exchange potentially. If you haven't heard of the concept of Chaos Monkey, which I think is maybe Facebook or something like that did that, of releasing something intentionally trying to cause issues, essentially like constantly fuzzing their own production instances to make sure it was really resilient. Fuzzing could be applicable here. It's not quite specific enough because we're looking at exchanging data and we're not talking about randomly stress testing, but we may use this. Dynamic testing. Are we doing some type of dynamic testing here? What do you guys think? No one put that as the answer. I'm curious why no one put that as the answer. This is a type of dynamic test. If we're exchanging data, there has to be some sort of execution that's going on. And yeah, Rebecca put this in here. We're not checking for vulnerabilities. Absolutely right. We may, as a part of this, check for vulnerabilities, and we want to dynamically test it to make sure it works correctly, but we're really focusing on properly exchanging data, which is where we get to the interface testing. We have software modules, and they need to communicate. They need to exchange data back and forth. We need to make sure that that data can actually interface cleanly. Cliff, you had a great example on Tuesday from like your experience in the medical field of different devices communicating. Would you mind sharing that again? Because that was
because when you're running like electronic medical records and you need to access the information that your MRI, your lab equipment, your CAT scans, they're usually running on a different interface or a different platform. You need to have the interface or the communication between the two different systems to change the information it's giving and placing it into the database of the electronic medical records.
Yeah, thank you. That's perfect. Yeah, we need to take all this data from all these different sources, these separately developed software modules, and make sure that we can normalize that data, clean it up so that it actually works together. The systems can exchange data, and it makes sense to both systems. They both know what it is.
And HL7 is the common interface structure that they use.
HL7, I don't even know what that is. So there we go. Cliff's got us covered. Perfect. And then API checksums. So we don't know specifically whether we're working with an API here. There's not enough information. And checksums, they can help us again to validate. So all of these answers have a piece of validity for what this question is asking. Because API checksums help us to validate the integrity of information that was sent. Did what I receive match what was sent? So that does absolutely fit in here. But we're properly exchanging data between separate modules. This is applicable, but it's not the best answer. So does anyone have other questions on this before we move on to question 5? Okay, you guys did really well with that. Nice job. Okay, question 5 is launched. Go ahead. Okay, a few more seconds left. I'm going to give you a couple bonus seconds to get your answers in while I put a link in the chat here for us. Okay, let's walk through this. Ooh, nice job. Whoa, everything has got a vote. Good to see. All right, the correct answer is a TCP Connect scan. So let's walk through this. I have a resource I'm going to show us that'll walk through some of these different types of scans. But Danielle is looking to identify systems. She's doing a penetration test. She hasn't gained sufficient access, so she can't generate raw packets. This means she can't generate her own and start tailoring them. She can't set specific flags, things like that. And she's trying to verify the most open services. Excellent. So first of all, what phase of a penetration test is Danielle most likely in right now? What is she trying to do right now? What stage in the attack is she at?
Discovery?
Yeah, yeah, this is discovery, reconnaissance. She's, again, black box test. She's got her eyes closed. She's running a TCP Connect scan to figure out, okay, oh, that's a desk right there. Oh, that's a computer. Okay, I found it. So that's what she's doing here. I'm going to exit out of here. I put a link to the chat to this. These are some of the more common types of port scanning techniques that you'll see, kind of a breakdown of those. And each has pros and cons in different use cases. Some are stealthier than others. Some are a lot faster than others. Based on the question we're going through right now, some of them are able to discover more services than others. A TCP Connect scan, we're going to go through that full three-way handshake with this system. So we get the most information. Versus a TCP SYN scan, one of the other options, all we're going to do is send a SYN packet, the first step in that three-way handshake, and see what comes back. But we don't actually respond to that. Both of those techniques give us different information based on how a system is configured. That's these last two columns here. So what happens if a port is open versus a port is closed? So if we've got a firewall blocking a port that is actively being used versus a port is just closed off, it's not in use at all. So the link is in the chat for you to go through this on your own time and study this a bit more. There's TCP Connect, TCP SYN, and UDP and ICMP. These are the four that are in this question here that we went through. So a UDP scan, this typically requires the ability to generate raw packets doing this type of a scan. The UDP scan it's not used very often. It can discover some things that a TCP scan cannot. It can discover some UDP type services, but this is much less common. An ICMP scan, it's a ping sweep. That's what we're doing. We're sending out a ping and seeing if we get a response back. This is the most basic for sure. And it's not going to verify the most open services. But type of scan, all of these are different types of scans that will give us some information. But again, this will give us the most open services without access to generate raw packets. Even if we could generate raw packets, a UDP scan probably isn't the right way to go anyways. So take a look through this chart. Feel free to reach out in the school platform or post in the community if you have questions on it or something doesn't seem clear. A lot of these probably look pretty similar to you. Here we start to set some of the individual flags that I mentioned. So we could set the FIN flag and see how a system responds, because it's going to be a little different. Setting the FIN flag on a packet actually can bypass some firewalls, because some firewalls are configured they don't know how to respond to that. Think of fuzzing. This is the idea behind fuzzing. I'm going to send a packet that doesn't make sense. Why am I getting a FIN packet when we haven't had a conversation yet? My firewall doesn't know how to respond to that. Well, go on through. I guess you got a job elsewhere. That's what fuzzing can help us discover, things like that. Okay. Does anyone have questions on number 5 before we move on to 6? Yes, Ravanand.
Josh, I kind of like not getting this the difference between the connect scan and SYN scan because they're like talking about you need some information. What is that, like credentials or whatever it is, right? For SYN scan, but connect scan you don't have any information. I want more information, what is that is.
Yeah. Thank you for asking, Ravanand. I'm going to jump to
Josh, maybe I can.
Please do. Yeah, please do, Deepu. I'll put this.
So
go ahead.
So the connect scan, see for Nmap or any other scanner, if you can go back to the question.
Yes, absolutely. This one here?
Yes. So TCP SYN scan will require the ability to generate raw packets and that is something that a super user can do. Okay, and Danielle is not a super user because she hasn't gained sufficient access on the system. So she is only limited to what a normal user can do. And the normal user can do a TCP connect scan, because for that, it will use the operating system's ability to connect normally. If you are a super user, you can generate raw packets, and you don't need that operating system to help you out with it. So so I hope that answers the question.
Very good call out. We have a TCP SYN scan, so we have the SYN flag that's set. Now, this is the first packet that gets sent out in a TCP handshake, but in a SYN scan, we're not responding to that second packet, that response packet from the server or wherever we're scanning at other device. So great call out on that, Deepu. I appreciate that. Just to add my own thing onto here. So, well, actually, Roshan, go ahead, please. I'd love to hear from you, buddy.
No, just to ask Deepu his explanation, right? I understood what he's trying to explain, but I just want to understand, as from CISSP point of view, do we have to understand a question from that technical point of view?
From the concept of gaining sufficient access to generate raw packets, I would have a good sense of what sort of packets are common to be able to send versus what are likely to take some additional tools or additional privileges to be able to do. So an ICMP scan, we can do that just with ping, essentially. A UDP scan, TCP SYN scan, we have to start crafting our own specialized packets. A connect scan, we can just run using Nmap kind of traditionally. This is one of the more common types of scans. So depends on the level of access, but I would, on the chart that I had here.
Actually, the reason for asking this question was, while answering this question, I was confused between A and B. However, I chose A just because I knew that in Connect, TCP Connect, the full TCP is going to happen. That means the three-way handshake. That's the reason why I selected A. But what I'm trying to say is, like, I didn't have that technical reasoning going on, what Deepu explained.
Sure.
So that's why I'm
and also, right, if
really concerned.
someone don't have any security, the networking background, right, they don't have anything, right? I don't know what to choose.
Yes.
Like me.
Yeah, very true. Well, I would say you should all be comfortable with the concept of a three-way handshake and have a good understanding that that's a common way to get a full response back to get information about a system. It's a very common type of scan. Some of the others, we start moving into custom crafted packets. So I would walk through some of these. Walk through some of these tables, study them, try and get a sense of the differences in use case. TCP SYN scan, another aspect of this is it's more stealthy because we aren't establishing a full connection. So we don't get the same level of information back, but it's stealthier. Again, we need elevated privileges to start running some of these things. Requires raw socket privileges. It's more detectable by intrusion detection systems. So we're taking a step up in elevation of privileges, but we're also watched more closely. So the TCP SYN scan has a different use case for this type of things, and they might mention that going back to the question, they might include information here mentioning that instead, okay, Danielle has sufficient access, but she wants to run a very stealthy scan. What might she run? So there might be some different information that's presented, but I would take a look through here, get a sense of the major differences in the use cases. These probably all the scans that you're going to see on the exam would be my guess. I can't think. These are the more common ones. It's not a great answer for you, Roshan, other than just spend a little bit more time studying these concepts and be comfortable with the three-way handshake. I don't think you need to go to the level of technical detail that Deepu brought up, but if you have a good sense of that table, I think you'll do well.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so the last slide that I had on this is just to look at that three-way handshake and refresh our memories that all of those different port scanning techniques that I mentioned, we have different scanning techniques because they all occur differently and they elicit a different response from a system. So here we have an open port and we're going through, you can see this is our three-way handshake versus a closed port. We still get a response, but it's a different type of response. You can see it's got the reset flag. So I just want to take a moment because this graphic happened to have some interesting things on it. This is a bit of a sidetrack, but you can see SYN, and then there's this I here. And you see SYN, and there's a J, and I+1. Who can tell me what's going on here? What are these numbers and letters that are going on there? Ignore that I and J don't necessarily stand for anything specific here. They're just variables. Anyone have an idea on this, what those numbers might be?
I mean, on the sequence and acknowledgement numbers.
Yeah, absolutely. We're sequencing. This could be an initialization vector. These are counters, incrementers. So when we send a SYN packet to a host that we want to start a three-way handshake with, that we want to establish a connection with, we're going to send it with some counter, an initialization vector. This is going to get to the host, and when it responds, it's going to increment it by 1. So it'll take whatever number we sent it and add a 1 to it for the acknowledgement. And it'll add its own variable too. So it'll send in its SYN response its own initialization vector. When our system responds, it again increments that by 1. Why do we do that? Why do we have these counters going along with our TCP connection? You got an idea on that? What attack are we trying to prevent or avoid here? Someone's got an idea. What security principle are we trying to validate here? Let's look at it from the other perspective. There's an attack we're trying to prevent. Enrico, excellent. Integrity. We're trying to validate the integrity of these packets. And we're trying to prevent a man-in-the-middle attack. So when I send this SYN packet with an initialization vector with some counter, and then I get a packet back, and that counter isn't incremented by 1, it's some different number, well, I need to be really suspicious. Is that the packet that I was expecting back? Because they got the number wrong. They aren't matching my sequence here. Could be someone trying to mimic a packet and do a man-in-the-middle attack. Yeah, exactly right. We're protecting integrity with that. It's similar like the API checksums, where we take a hash of that information that we just sent, and we have a checksum. Is what we sent, does it match the checksum? This is sort of a similar version of that. It's very lightweight. Okay, let's get ready for the next question here. So get yourself set and go ahead with question 6. Few more seconds to get your answers in. Nice. Ooh, I like it. We got a split vote between race condition and buffer overflow. Now I'm going to pause here for a moment. This is a tricky question for me because it starts to get more and more out of my comfort zone professionally. Talking about path disclosure, local file inclusion, race conditions, buffer overflows. These are coding security software vulnerabilities here that we're talking about. And some of them are kind of tricky or complicated. We're looking for vulnerabilities that are not or unlikely to be found by a web vulnerability scanner. So maybe it would be found by a web vulnerability scanner, but it's unlikely. That's an important note here. So the correct answer is a race condition. And let's walk through why, because this, again, this is a challenging one. It's challenging to me. Path disclosure. Let's start there. What is path disclosure? Obviously, it's a vulnerability that can be found with a web vulnerability scanner. But what does that mean? What risk is that that's coming about? Who's got an idea on that one? Local path disclosure and local file inclusion can be paired together very closely. Anyone have an idea on that? It's a really common vulnerability in a lot of websites that are just kind of started up by people. So path disclosure, when you have a website or some application, it's sitting on a server somewhere. That application lives somewhere. Even if it's in the cloud, it still lives somewhere physically. A path disclosure is where we are accidentally able to see the path of the file. So let me give you an example of what this would look like. So we have here, this is off of Notion. We can see Pillar Security, that's my company, off Notion.site. And then we have this. This is, in a sense, this starts to look like a pathway, because it is. So what happens if I instead do /Etsy/password? What would happen? I don't know. Maybe I would get to the right spot. Maybe we'll find my password file. Oh, no password file. Okay, kicks us back somewhere else because it doesn't know where to go. And that's what this is. So path disclosure, we're able to get a sense of how we could potentially navigate around. So if you're familiar with Linux, we could try things like, okay, I want to navigate my directory, but I'm going to use 2 dots, which kind of takes me up a directory level, or takes me back a directory level. So a little bit higher. Well, let's do it again. Okay, maybe I'm getting a little bit closer to being in my root directory. All right, now let's try Etsy. So we'll keep going through that until we can find things that might disclose information we were not supposed to see. Local file inclusion pairs right along with that. Imagine if you went to my Etsy password file and you got all my hashes. That'd be pretty powerful right there. So we can find files that are included or that we can get access to that we shouldn't. So these are very serious vulnerabilities for sure. A lot of times path disclosure, the most common way you'll see this is people set something up on a server, they change some things around, and they forget to change or modify the security for their path. So there's a path that's remaining open that should have just been closed. And sometimes attackers can get information off of that. They'll tell them, how is your system structured? It'll even tell them, is it a Windows server? Is it a Linux server? They can get a lot of information from that. I'm going to come back to race condition. Buffer overflows, we're putting data into something and we're seeing, can we overflow the limits that was supposed to take up? And if so, what happens? Buffer overflows are unpredictable in the sense that we weren't 100% sure what will happen. A buffer overflow attack could lead to all sorts of things. It could be a denial of service, just crash an application. We talked about the concepts of fail open versus fail closed. We could see that. We can see information disclosure. There's a lot of different things that could come out of a buffer overflow and absolutely discoverable by a web vulnerability scanner. Race condition. This is what threw me off because it seems like this is something that should be discoverable by a web vulnerability scanner. The keyword is unlikely. And the reason for that is because race conditions are very difficult to replicate, very difficult to replicate. We're relying on timing. A lot of times I think microseconds would probably even be an exaggeration. We're talking about competing what was the word I was looking for? Competing executions, I guess. Things happening at the same time. One finishes first, and that causes an error. But if you run it 100 times, well, maybe it's only an error 1 out of 100 times. So we don't always know that a race condition is going to get discovered when we're running a scan like this. It may or may not. But again, just because it's so hard to replicate, we can't guarantee that it's going to be found by a vulnerability scanner. So I'm going to pause. Does that make sense? Because I had to really think about this for a while of why wouldn't I be able to find a race condition? I would sure want a vulnerability scanner to be able to find it, which is true. It's just hard to find. So who's got some thoughts on that? Yeah.
So yeah, my thoughts on that. So I would actually argue it would be easier to find race conditions in a web application than it would, when you compare to buffer overflows. So my initial answer was buffer overflow, but yeah. So I still feel that it's kind of easier to find race conditions than it is to find buffer overflows in a web application.
And Deepu, what I'll say is that from my understanding, you have much more experience in this domain than I do. So I trust your real world answer more than the CISSP official answer on this. So yeah, thank you for keeping us grounded on that. Yeah, Rebecca, did you have a question or call out for us?
I'm not sure. Someone had a question about actual familiarity as in hands-on or being having work experience, and I think we look at this as a management exam, but I think they're also testing for that, because if you look at the requirements for certification, right, they are asking that you have experience in some of the domains.
Mm-hmm.
Why I say that is, as a VM engineer, the typical scan tools I know, say Tenable, Rapid7, at a minimum, they give you the path if they're pointing to a version issue or a certain vulnerability. So, and I have, from experience, had to deal with a path disclosure related finding. I don't know what race condition is and have not worked on it, but from my experience, I was able to isolate and do a process of elimination of everything else and was left with race condition. But yes, I'm thinking that for areas where you don't have the technical know-how, you need to really study like crazy.
Absolutely, Rebecca. Well, and you did a great job drawing from your experience of, well, I've seen this before. I've never seen that one before. Maybe I've seen that one. That's absolutely a legitimate way. Your goal is to get the correct answer on the exam. We want you to understand it, but if you get the correct answer, that's just as good when it comes to passing. So yeah, nice job. Nice job. Okay, let's get ready for question 7 here. Coming up, we got some good topics of conversation surrounding this one. So there we go. We get to talk about Stride. Timer started. Go ahead. Nice job. Good votes coming in. A couple more seconds. All right. Nice job. Boy, you guys are doing well. Consensus rules with threat categorization. You're absolutely right. Well done. Okay, let's talk through this. So Stride, you've already identified threat categorization. This is helpful because we talk about it's in threat modeling. Absolutely. So I have we're going to focus mostly on Stride just in general as a model for what it does. So we've identified that it helps us to identify threats. And you're used to seeing Stride based on the acronym. We have spoofing, we have tampering, repudiation, information disclosure, denial of service, and elevation of privilege. One of the things that really helped me understand why we use the Stride model is using this property violated. I really like going back to this. If you mentioned earlier, there was a question where we looked at the property violated and it was integrity. This is what this helps us do is so let me take a step back. For doing risk assessments, which would include doing threat modeling, things like that, we start with identifying the assets that we care about. If there's risk, it's against something that's important to us. So an asset could be a physical asset. This could be data. It could be people. It could be a physical site, potentially. It could be things like intellectual property. It could also be, applications, software, any type of an asset, even data processing activity. So data exchange, that's an asset that you have. When we have an asset, now we can identify against that asset, what do we care about? What's most important to this asset? Do we care about confidentiality? Well, if we're posting a privacy policy on our webpage, no, we don't care about confidentiality. We care about like integrity, make sure no one messes with that privacy policy. Care about availability, make sure that anyone that wants to can view it. So we identify the asset first. Then we can identify, okay, what is it that we care about protecting on that asset? And it's almost always a combination of all of these. And you can kind of prioritize or rank them. But you can walk through that and get a sense of, okay, I care about the authorization piece of this. I want to make sure that anyone that's accessing or working on this system is authorized to do so. What would violate authorization? Elevation of privilege. So we have a threat that we could pick out. Now we can start talking about, we have this application. The most important thing to us is we want to avoid the threats related with elevation of privileges. What are those specific threats and risks that we have? Now we can go deeper into the process. This helps us to really get clear, and it helps us to clarify and define what it is that we care about, what it is that we're trying to avoid. When we're doing mitigation work, when we're actually bolstering our defense, when we're using defense in depth, we need to address those against threats. We do that to reduce risk. We can't reduce risk unless we know what the risk is. It's hard to know what the risk is very well unless we have an asset with a threat against it. So I live in Montana. It's an extremely low risk that a hurricane is going to come through Montana. So it would be foolish of me to spend a bunch of money putting up hurricane defenses and barriers for flooding on my house. It would be a waste of money. Same thing with a business. If a business has an asset that a property violation doesn't make sense for, they're not going to spend time or money going and investing, securing it. Now, this is common sense, but this is the foundation of the process for how we make those decisions on a business end. So from when you're thinking like a manager, I would encourage you to look at the property being violated and less at the threat. Now, the threat is matched to the STRIDE acronym, so you kind of need to start there. But the property violated, if you can focus on that piece, it'll bring you in the right direction for thinking like a manager in some of these aspects, because you need to make a business decision. Yeah, Rebecca, you had a question or comment for us? You're on mute if you're talking, Rebecca.
Yeah, sorry. Sorry to draw you back. I was thinking of what DPAC, was it DPAC or DPU?
DPU?
Yeah, stated. And we may have to revisit that that last question. I'm thinking the phrasing of the question might be the problem. So
is this the question you're referring to?
I was trying to get, yes, hang on a sec. So look at the URLs that I just posted. Yeah, the one, that one there. I'm thinking that that word there, web vulnerability scanner, is a misnomer. They probably meant a regular vulnerability scanner versus a web vulnerability scanner. A web vulnerability scanner would be looking at a web app, so AppSec. If you're talking AppSec, then definitely race condition can be discovered. The two URLs I put there are by Potswiger. One of the founders of Potswiger is the granddaddy of AppSec, and they are totally aware of what a race condition is and how you can use Burp Suite to find it.
Excellent. Yeah.
And they're saying that Burp Suite falls under a web vulnerability scanner. So, yeah, this question, it's a head scratcher right now.
You can tell that there's some discrepancy in the real world, especially as the technology that we have outpaces how the exam catches up with things, for sure. Yeah, absolutely. The key word that really helps me understand this is the unlikely. Because, man, I told you guys I wrestled with this too, of like, why wouldn't it find the race condition? But they're competing executions, competing timing. So if we run it for long enough, if we run a vulnerability scanner for long enough, then it likely will discover race conditions. But it's not necessarily true, because we have to have the right specific conditions for that execution. And it sounds like some vulnerability scanners are finding ways to discover that, but it's difficult with absolute certainty to find. Buffer overflow, we can find this more reliably, because if we have a buffer flow, when we do some type of an execution, it should cause that buffer overflow to happen pretty much every time. We should be able to repeat that every time. Race condition, we can go through the exact same process 100 times. Maybe the race condition won't happen until the 101st time. So it's competing. We don't know exactly how fast something is going to get done versus something else. So unlikely is the key word. I don't particularly care for this question either, except for the discussion that it's generating. For sure, I'm getting to learn a lot too. So yeah, Saravan, you had your hand raised?
Yeah, general question about the web. I mean, any vulnerability scanner, right? How does it test? Like, is it like a static testing or a dynamic testing?
Yeah, really good question. We don't really know for sure here. It's not very clear. If it's a web vulnerability scanner, I get the sense that the web might be live, so it potentially would be dynamic. All of these things, for the most part, suggest dynamic, but it's not absolute because they don't give us that information there. So great call, Ramon. This question is a little vague. It is an official practice question, but there are official practice questions I come across sometimes that, okay, you could definitely argue for another way, or maybe include some more specific information on the question.
And Josh, we actually had someone come in, because the HIPAA, you have to have vulnerability scans run, I think every year, every other year at the latest. And I actually have a Burp Suite printout that I will review and share with you, and maybe get more information on what it actually does.
That would be great to see what sort of things that I can find. Very neat. Cool. Yeah, PortSwigger, I think some of you had put some links in the chat. They do have some really neat tools that you can use. So it's worthwhile bookmarking PortSwigger too. Okay. So we went through questions 6 and 7. Nice questions from everyone. Does anyone have questions or things they'd like to chat about with Stride? Again, this is great for thinking like a technician.
Hey, Josh.
Yeah.
I got an input there that might be helpful, or just something I kind of strived with at the time. Yeah. Stride, I forgot what the question and wording is, but Stride versus Pasta. Because when I think of Pasta, I'm thinking of the threat model as well. But what would be the difference?
Well, let's go look up. Yeah. Pasta model. Ooh, what am I going to get for? I better put cybersecurity. I don't know what kind of a pasta model I'll come up with otherwise. Be a good one for Dolly or something like that. Give me a pasta model. So I want an image actually. Let's go find an image of that.
Or maybe Pasta versus Stride.
Yeah.
Where you get a side-by-side comparison.
Let's see if, okay, that's sort of helpful. They didn't have the acronym. There we go. Process for attack simulation and threat analysis. Boy, it doesn't really have a graphic on there. I'm trying to find a visual that would help us unpack that a bit better. Yeah. I want a better breakdown of this. Yeah, we'll come. I'm going to jot that question down because I don't want to. That's a good question for you, Paul. I want some more visuals or things that'll keep us better organized to answer that.
Gotcha.
That's a good question. Yeah. Different models will. Let's see. Let me write this down before I. Paul. Pasta. Okay.
Yeah, Pasta versus Stride, because I don't know. When I hear Pasta, I just immediately went to threat modeling, but in this case, it was Stride.
I'll see if I can work up something similar to this, because I actually would like to have some of those distinctions, especially the common use case, like you're calling out, Paul, would be helpful. So I'll see if I can come up with something similar. Yeah, good question. You briefly asked that. All right, let's get ready for the next one here. Okay, we're doing okay on time for the most part. Go ahead. Oh, this is the hardest one for me personally, just given my lack of background here. Couple more seconds to get your answers in. Okay. Show you guys the results there. The correct answer is B. Now, I'm going to explain this the best that I can. I'll be counting on a couple of you to help me out here on my explanation, because I mean, it's no secret. I study for these so that I can prepare and be a little bit more ready to answer some of these things. So, coverage criteria when we're validating code. Coverage criteria. I used the example earlier when we were talking about fuzzing, where a vehicle undergoes stress testing, things like that. If we're going to use the same concept here, we're looking at testing different types of functionalities of the vehicle. So we might test to make sure, okay, I'm going to open and close the door 100 times, make sure that it works. I'm going to do that with all the doors. And okay, now I'm going to drive it all the way until it needs another oil change. So I'm going to check the engine. I'm going to do that, slowly, and then I'm going to do it once on the interstate. So we're running different types of tests to capture the different functions of a vehicle. Similar going on here with the code testing suite. Our coverage criterion are different aspects of our code that we want to test, and it might require different types of testing. So let's walk through the different types that we have here. That'll be almost our focus. Input testing. This is input validation in a sense. So what happens when we take an input from a user or another system? If our code has a list of areas that it's going to accept inputs, we want to make sure our testing suite covers all of the inputs. That's the criterion that we have. We're going to test all of the input possibilities in our code to make sure they're validated. Statement, same sort of thing. We're going to look at the statements that are within our code, and we're going to make sure they all get tested. Different types of testing here versus here. Input testing, would this more likely be static or dynamic? Is it more likely to be static or dynamic?
Dynamic.
Yeah, dynamic, absolutely. Absolutely. Statement, could it be static? Could it be dynamic?
Maybe both.
Yeah, could be either. So there's different types of tests that we're going to run. So statement, we're going to run every statement within the code. Branches. Now we have logic that's within code. Okay, if you're seeing something here, go on this branch of execution versus, okay, there's a different condition, go on this branch. So branches in the code, we want to test all those. Same thing with conditions, where we have things like Boolean logic being used. We want to test if it's an and. Well, what if the and condition is met? Does our code work as we expect it to? What if it's not met? What if that condition is not met? What happens then? So we go through and we test all the condition statements. Bounds, this is sort of similar. We're testing where we might have boundaries on our application. This is, again, if someone understands bounds testing more than me, please speak up, because I don't have a strong understanding of this. API, if there's API aspects of our code, we might test this. I think this is more to throw us off a little bit. I don't know whether that would be considered a coverage criterion. I'm honestly not sure on that. Loops. So if we have loops in our code, we want to test it the entire way through the loop as well to make sure that works. So again, we're just looking at the different aspects of our code. Function. I missed function. So that was probably the most important one. Codes have functions. You've heard the term microservices. It's kind of the same concept in coding. I'm going to code a function, and I can call that function in all sorts of different areas. But I want to make sure I'm testing every function that's available in my code to make sure they all work. So understanding that I've pretty much tapped out my knowledge on there. Does anyone have questions that the group can maybe help us out with? And one of my questions is, if anyone understands bound more than I do, I'd love to hear from you. Yeah, Rashawn.
Sorry, I don't know about bounds.
Okay.
What I'm trying to say is here was, I read somewhere that coverage criteria, when we are doing this kind of testing, it's about functionality testing. There are two types of testing, right? Functionality and security.
Yeah.
So just based on that, I saw the word function and I chose that. So Absolutely. I didn't have any other reason. I just knew that coverage criteria is, because for some systems or maybe applications, coverage criteria, when we do this testing, we check in terms of percentage, like 80%, 70%. So number of codes and number of lines that you are testing. So I just knew that it is a functionality testing, not a security testing. And that was the reason why I chose B. I had no clue.
This is a good question, Rick. The first time I read this question, right? Like, my mind straightly going at A, because A, we're passing inputs, it's testing all this conditional branch and everything, but it's not so the function I didn't think about a function, right? Yeah. So both sounds similar, but there's a difference. And Josh, one more thing, I have a question, right? Between bounds and the limit, right? They both are kind of interrelated, but I kind of struggle, what's the difference between bound and limit? So one thing I know, it's a limit. Okay, hey, if the age is between 1 to 60, you're expected to enter value 1 to 60, right? So that's the limit, right? You should not be entering more than 60. That's a limit, right? What is the bound? The bound is it it's the same thing as the limit? Kind of confused.
Yeah, well, I don't have a good answer for you on that, Sravan. Deepu, did I hear you speaking up?
Yeah,
Another answer for us?
I haven't worked in this domain, but from whatever I am reading on the net, it seems to me, whatever he said of limits, that seems to be what bounds is. You're basically trying to make sure that a given variable is within the expected range and not outside of it.
That makes sense to me. I'm sure there's a more authoritative answer out there, but all those things sound correct to me, of bounds and limit testing here. Boy, we need to get some more software engineers on this call. Invite your friends so we can have some more. We need our own coverage criterion for all the domains here in the group. So yeah, nice job. I'm going to just read through my notes on here to make sure there's nothing else that I wanted to put. So for answer A, input coverage is important. It's not standard terminology for code coverage criteria, though. Input, we might do input validation. That's an extremely important part. If you look at the OWASP top 10, input validation is the number one thing that you want to care about as far as the types of vulnerabilities or impact that could have, as long as your code is actually running. Let's see. So for C, I wanted to read through. API testing is important, but again, it's not a standard part of code coverage criterion. And let's see. I just have a note here that it includes bounds, but that's more related to boundary value analysis. So it sounds kind of like Deepu and Sravan on what you guys were mentioning there. And loop coverage is sometimes considered, but it's not typically grouped with primary coverage criteria. I don't know why. Those are just some of the notes that I found as I was doing some of my research on that. So again, thank you for your patience, because this is admittedly my weakest domain when we start getting more into software and coding. Okay. I want to acknowledge, boy, we're just about at time here. I'm going to go through the next two questions kind of quickly, just so that we can get to a slide I want to. And I know Cliff had offered potentially to hang out and just kind of study and go through any remaining questions if I have to take off. So if you do need to get off to go to work or get to bed or wherever you are in the world, then go right ahead. Feel free to drop off. Thank you for being here with me this morning. I really enjoyed getting to study with you guys. Love the questions that you guys are asking. In fact, just real quick before we go on to the next question, I'm going to put another link in the chat. Give me one moment to grab this. This is where you can send me practice questions. The practice questions you guys send me, I would much rather cover than the ones that I can come up with here. So feel free to bookmark that link. Anything you submit there just goes directly to me, and I review those every week. Okay, so with that, we'll continue on, but if you have to take off, enjoy your day. All right, get ready. Question 9. Go ahead. Couple more seconds left. Nice. All right. Ooh, another good split vote. That's what I like to see. That's what I like to see. Okay. The correct answer is printers. I'm going to put in just my own personal note on this. I don't know why, but it seems like test writers love including printers somehow or another. There are vulnerabilities related to printers. There are some serious ones, absolutely. But it just seems like ISC2 really likes to include printers. So chances are you're going to see something like this in your exam related to printers somehow or another. So let's walk through this. We had a split vote between web servers and printers. Pretend 515 and 9100 aren't listed up here as ports. It's just 80 and 443. Who now picks web servers as the answer? I'm not going to make you guys raise your hands, but yeah, web servers, exactly. It's definitely going to be web servers if it's 80 and 443. We have 2 ports open. They're both our web ports that we care about, encrypted and unencrypted. We got a web server going on. Now they throw these other 2 ports in here. I'm going to read you what the ports are because I don't have them memorized, and my guess is that you don't either, which is fine. You need to expect that that's going to be the case on the exam at some portion. You're going to be presented with information where it's like, I don't know it, I could have studied it, but it didn't seem worth the time. And that's just going to be the reality of it. So let me pull up my notes on what those port numbers are. That is the wrong week. How did I get to the wrong week? There we go. So port 515 is line printer daemon, LPD, and 9100 is jet direct or app socket. Now, I don't know those things. I'm not going to remember them 10 minutes from now when we move forward. Here's what I want you to be aware of. Here's how I would realistically go about answering this test question. So web servers, I have 2 ports. Tell me it's a web server for sure. I know web servers can host a lot of different things on them. A web server isn't necessarily just doing web. It could be serving something over the web. And I have 2 ports that I have no earthly idea what they're for. They could be for anything. So it is some sort of a web server. I know that answer is correct somehow. It may not be the most correct. File server. What ports would I expect to see related to a file server? What are a couple of the ports that come to mind? Yeah, okay. Let's see. You got 445 and it. Did you have something to call out?
Is it 20?
Yeah, could have 20, all those for FTP and SFTP. Absolutely. So we have some port numbers that we do know, that we are familiar with, and that we would expect to see for a file server. And those aren't showing up. So I would cross that off my list. No one put file servers, so you all kind of have the same intuition. Wireless access points. Now, wireless access points, of course, they use ports, protocols, and services, like anything else that's interconnected. We don't have strong associations with specific port numbers. And a wireless access point, while we may be able to access it over the web, it's a little bit less common. The way we would access a wireless access point is we would be on the network and we would actually navigate to the IP, or we would potentially remote into it, or remote into whatever the access control system is for that wireless network. So there may be 80 and 443, but there's just not a strong enough association with specific ports for WAPs. Now, printers, there's a lot of weird ones. And that's truly just what I remember, is printers just have these random ports that are associated with it. I see some random ports and I see that it's a web server. Well, chances are this is a printer that we can access via the web. There's a web interface. Even if it's just for administrative, going and looking at the school, maybe it is an interface that employees can use. The bottom line is, the way I would go about answering this, identify there's a web service and something else. I know that something else, or at least I'm confident or pretty confident it's not a file server. And I'm pretty confident it's not a wireless access point. And I know printers use weird port numbers. So that's how I would go about answering this question. Yeah, Deepu, there's a web server with a printer attached to it. You're pretty much right. It is kind of a web server because it is hosted, has some web interface that you can navigate to. Yeah, so you're not wrong. It is a web server. It just is a web server that's serving a printer as the function of that with those other two ports. So just for the sake of time, since we're already over, I'm going to move on to question 10.
And one thing I just want to point out real quick,
Yeah, please do.
one thing that I came across is Kerberos authentication is used in communicating with printers.
Good to be aware of on that. Good to be aware of on that. So you might see Kerberos ports in the mix. I don't remember Kerberos. I don't remember the port number offhand. That is one that might be worth knowing for the exam, just because Kerberos would tell you Windows in all likelihood, and that could give you information really highly related to whatever question you're on. So that's probably a port number worth being aware of. You've heard my advice of how to cram effectively before an exam. Review your acronyms and review your ports, protocols, and services the day before and the day of. If you have those fresh in your mind, they will speed you up substantially in the exam. And a lot of times that if you know what service is associated with a port, and if you know what an acronym stands for, oftentimes that's enough information to answer the question. If someone actually knew what these ports numbers were, they would be able to answer printer with confidence. So there's all sorts of things like that.
And that's why I suggest using the Sunflower documentation
Yes.
as a last minute review.
Yeah, if you want to put that in the chat, Cliff, or if someone wants to jot that down, the Sunflower guide has some really great stuff. It's a common thing we hear from people who are passing, is that they'll use that. Okay, let's do question 10. Get yourself ready here while I get my timer up. And go ahead. This is our last one. Oops, I think I launched that.
Yeah, I'm getting the link. One moment, please.
Okay. Nice job. A couple more seconds to get your answers in there. Now, this I think is a challenging one because you're given different methodologies or frameworks by ISC2 for, like we've talked about in the penetration testing phase, how there's reconnaissance or discovery as initial stages within this. You can see reconnaissance is an option here. While we're looking at the NIST definition, the National Institute of Science and Technology, National Institute of Science and Technology, or standards, National Institute of Standards and Technology. We'll find out. I have one of these special publications pulled up. But anyways, they have their own little process that they want to walk through. So it's a little bit, well, we're going to look at the source material for it. So the correct answer is gaining access, And this is tricky because my inclination, if I were reading this question and I didn't know the specifics of NIST or their process of how they were going to do this, I would probably look at discovery as an option. It's tricky because discovery is not actually listed explicitly as one of the attack phases, though. So we're going to go to the official guidance though. So real quick before I do that.
Yeah, like before you go to the guidance,
Yeah.
if you can just go to the question, I'm not sure if I'm reading this correctly. So it says in the question, NIST specifies 4 attack phase steps: gaining access, escalating privileges, system browsing, and installing additional tools. So they have installing additional tools as one of the steps. And then the question says, once attackers install additional tools, what phase will a penetration tester typically return to? Oh, typically return to. Okay, I didn't read the question correctly. Sorry, my bad.
Oh no, you're fine, Deepu. Yeah, this is the cycle of what's going to happen. So an attacker will go into a system. He runs discovery. We talked about the black box. He's feeling his way around. So he's gained access to a system. Then he's found something out there, found vulnerabilities, maybe, and gotten access. He's then escalated privileges. He's tried to crack or pop up some admin credentials. He browses that system. Similar again to discovery. He hits a black box. He's feeling around the system. What files are around here? What sort of data? What system is this even doing? What's its function? And then installing additional tools. We have a lot of tools for our trade. Man, the open source community, oh man, that's probably the best part of our field, I think. So we have all these different tools, and those tools enable us to perform all of these different functions at a higher level. Okay, now I'm inside of a system. Now maybe I've set up like a RAT, a remote access Trojan. So now I can start doing some additional things here. And we'll go into the source material of what that looks like. So I'm going to put a link in the chat here. I am a huge fan of using this sort of documentation. It is not the best study material for the exam. It is really good study material for concepts on the exam. ISC2 doesn't define our industry. They use publications and guidance from other industry bodies. NIST, National Institutes of Standards and Technology, is a very common one, very popular, enormously popular. And look at this. It has the title of our domain in the name of the guidance here. Oh, I forgot to put the link in the chat there. Oh, no, I did put that in there. So if you're struggling with a concept, if you're struggling with a specific concept, it can help to go to the source material. Not all the time. This is not what you would want to study exclusively for the exam. But let's go down to the table of contents. Look at the sort of things that we can go through here. We have an assessment methodology that we could learn about. We can go and we can learn about file integrity and checking or network stiffing. We can learn the difference between passive and active scanning. We can go down here and we can learn about discussing a security policy. These are all concepts that ISC2 looks at when they want to write a test question about technical tools and resources selection. The exam is definitely going to mention tools. We looked at Nmap and Nessus and some things like that. You're definitely going to get test questions with open source tools or proprietary tools, potentially tool. So great place if you want to really understand something at a deep level and get the most accurate answer. Yeah, Deepa put in, IC2 loves NIST. Absolutely they do. NIST is one of the more, to me, if I have a question on something, I go find the NIST special publication that discusses it. Because they have the methodologies are my favorite part. I know we're getting out of scope here a little bit, but it's so interesting to go through and look through these different methodologies they have. And that's where I pulled these next slides from. I'm going to skip past this one. We'll come right back to it. But this is their attack. This is how NIST defines it. So it starts out as discovery as kind of a distinct phase in a way. And we have the attack phase. And you can see that there's this circular motion going on where, okay, we've run discovery. Again, eyes closed, we're feeling around. We've discovered something. Now we've gained access to it. Then we're going to try and escalate privileges so we can do more things. Then we're going to browse the system. We're kind of in discovery again. In a way. And we want to do all this so we can install additional tools. Once we do, we have more power. We've got ourselves equipped from an attacker perspective behind enemy lines or behind a network. So we install those additional tools so that we can gain more access. This could be traversing a network, potentially gaining access to other systems. So this is the official phase that it goes through. So after we install additional tools, it circles back to gaining access. Again, my inclination was to look at the discovery phase. The trick is it's not a part of the attack phase, and there is a loop. So a little bit of an unclear question, but that's why I wanted to bring it up, because there's going to be questions that just aren't super clear on the exam. That aren't going to be super clear on the exam, or will ask you to evaluate competing methodologies, like starting with reconnaissance versus starting discovery. It's different phrasing for the same sort of concept. So backing up one, this is just kind of a condensed version of this, but we have planning, we'll plan our attack, we'll plan our penetration test, we'll run our discovery. When we looked at that, goes into attack, which is those 4 phases here, and attack leads back to additional discovery. So again, this is why the test question itself was a little bit confusing, because it comes back to discovery, which I think was the #1 answer we had in the poll here, but we're looking at the attack phase specifically. So very confusing question, but I want to walk you guys through about how you get questions that don't make sense. And you look at the source material, and a lot of times it'll make a lot more sense. Yeah, Paul, go ahead.
Yeah, quick question. It does sound, the question itself is kind of convoluted in my opinion, but correct me if I'm wrong. For the attacker to install tools, wouldn't he have to gain access first? So how would he go back if he's
Absolutely.
not?
So we have in this test question, we have the 4 attack phases, and then here, once the attackers install additional tools. So they've already gotten to this stage in the question scenario. So we've installed additional tools. They've gone through this full process, and then they circle back. Did I understand your question, Paul? I might have missed that.
Yeah, so the question, maybe I read it wrong, but it's saying once he's installed the additional tools, what phase will, once attackers install tools, what phase will penetration tester typically return to?
Yeah.
So I'm saying that the way I'm reading it, if he's installed tools, he's already gained access. Why would he go back to gain access again?
Yeah, Josh has put in the chat, which is great, is it's a looping process. So think of a spiral that's going upward instead. So I go through this.
I like what Chris said, wash, rinse, repeat.
Wash, rinse, repeat. Yeah, that's very true. So let's take the analogy. Let's just look at my home network. So I have my home network. I have a home router. Everything's on there. I have a guest network that's a little bit separate. And then I have my office network that's segmented out a little bit differently. So in the discovery phase, someone wants to attack my home network. And let's say they get access to my home router, just the top level router, not my office, maybe not the guest network. Now they're going to escalate privileges. Okay, they popped a set of credentials on my home router, and they were able to browse through that, start running some network scans. They're doing discovery again, now that they've escalated privileges and have the ability to do more intense scans, like configuring their own flags, kind of like the scanning techniques we talked about earlier. So they've escalated privileges in order to be able to do discovery better. And then they install additional tools. So maybe they install some password cracking tool right on there so they could pass. That wouldn't be a very good example. I guess you could do that, but you wouldn't do it locally. They'll install some additional tools, some additional network scanning tools. Maybe they can set up a RAT inside a remote access Trojan or something like that. And then they go through this process again. They'll use those additional tools. They'll use the access that they've already gained to gain more access. In this scenario, gaining access could look like traversing the network. So now that they've gone through this process, they've cracked and popped to my home network, then they have discovered, oh, inside this network, there's a little office network too. I'm going to use these new tools and all this access that I've gotten to go try and gain access to that network. I'm going to traverse.
So a separate,
yeah.
They're talking about a separate network, gain access to a separate network, not necessarily the same network that you already gained access to.
Could be different networks. It could be different systems. So let's say they crack my personal laptop here. They've gained access, escalated privileges. They have admin access on my personal laptop. They've browsed my system. They've discovered some things, run network scans. Now they've installed additional tools. They own my laptop. Well, my personal laptop sits 2 inches from my work laptop. They share some of the same peripherals at times. So now that they've installed additional tools and they've discovered that I have a work laptop, maybe they're going to try and gain access to that somehow. So it could be system. It could even be on the same system. Take the case of a server. Okay, so we gain access. We try and escalate privileges. Let's say we fail to escalate privileges. We can't get there. We're not able to get admin credentials. We still have user credentials. Well, we can still browse the system, not to the extent we want to, but we can still do some browsing. And we can't install all the tools we want, but we can get 1 or 2 on. Well, maybe those 1 or 2 are enough where I can gain more access. Now I can get a set of admin credentials and I escalate privileges more and browse the system more. So I'm even increasing the level of access that I have on a system. Think of something with severe access control requirements. I can work my way up in privileges, get access to different areas of a system that I'm not supposed to. It's just cyclical. We're spiraling upwards till we have master control over everything.
All right, thanks.
Yeah, you betcha. Josh, was great having you. I know you got to drop off. I'm going to get ready to close out here too. So thank you for being here. Thank you for your questions. I just absolutely love the questions you guys have. I can tell you're studying hard and working hard at this. Thank you for taking your time to be here. I really enjoy my time with you guys. So proud of y'all. So I don't know if Cliff was going to hang out and keep this room open in case you guys wanted to continue the conversation and chat some more. Cliff, I can send you a link to the slides if you want to go over.
I can do a little bit, but I need to get ready for an interview.
Oh, you
also.
got an interview. Well, how about we close out so you can focus on getting ready for your interview here. Yeah. Rebecca, you have your hand raised?
Yes, I was going to ask, what's the domain for next week?
Yeah, we'll be moving into domain 7. Who's got what domain 7 is off the top of their head?
Okay.
Domain CISSP.
It's SecOps.
SecOps.
Okay, all right. We got some fun stuff coming up then. Okay, awesome. Well, thank you again, and I'm looking forward to seeing you guys next week. Reach out over school if you have any questions or comments or resources to share. So, sure appreciate y'all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Everyone
Bye.
have a good day.
Bye, guys.
Bye, guys.